What is up, guys? This is Pete Clark, and welcome back to the Card Poker Podcast. This is episode number 82, and it's entitled Semi-Professional Poker, and I have a special guest, Jules, on the show today. How's it going, man?
Yeah, good, thanks, you?
Yeah, very good, thank you. So, Jules is here basically to talk us through his journey in poker so far, which I think is a pretty interesting one. Little table of contents here. Jules' story basically starts off with a plunge into taking poker almost professionally, like taking it very, very seriously and quitting his job. And I think that's something that a lot of people go through and deliberate. So that should be pretty cool to talk about. Then we're going to talk a little bit about your staking that you got into. I think staking is a topic that very rarely gets covered, yet does feature as a choice in the journey of an aspiring player quite often. I then want to move on and talk a little bit about the mental game and some issues that have come up there in Jules' journey so far, and I'm going to relate some of that to the work I've been working on recently, which is my new book, Poker Therapy, that will be out really soon, and we'll wrap up by talking a little bit about how the ideas in that book fit in with Jules' story. So yeah, why don't we start from the top? So where were you before you decided to take that plunge and take up poker more seriously?
So I would say it was in early 2017, I think. I was just basically working full-time as an iOS developer. I was playing a fair amount of poker. I had some success at sort of, I would say, low stakes. I think, and then I binked a small W cube for like 30k or something like that. And shortly after that, I signed up to a training site, Raise Your Edge, and then from there I decided to kind of take the plunge and go full time, quit my job, go full time, and see how it went.
Nice. So was that like a scary moment then, like when you decided, okay, I'm actually going to like give up my main source of income and take up this new thing?
It was definitely scary. Luckily, I had sort of a bit of money behind me where it wasn't, I wasn't going to kind of lose my house or anything like that. And also, I'd been through a similar situation in my job, I guess, where I quit my full-time job and went and started my own company and was self-employed. So it was kind of a little bit relatable. So I'd already kind of taken a plunge. So it wasn't as bad as it has been, I guess, for some people. But yeah, it's definitely still a little bit scary.
Yeah, absolutely. I've actually got a bit that I forgot to even bring up with you when we were having our little pre-recording chat there, and I was talking about like what aspects of my book that I might promote during this podcast, and it just reminded me that towards the end of the book, Poker Therapy, that is a mental game book, and I'll just shamelessly dive into a plug right away because why not? I've actually got a section that's called Chapter 6, the top 10 poker roadblocks. And just to give you a little bit of backstory, the chapter starts, I quote, "This chapter is about what could have been and what normally prevents it. It will not surprise you to learn that in the modern climate, the vast majority of players do not reach their poker goals. Some want to turn professional and never do. Others simply want to beat 25 NL online and fail. For some, they just want to stop losing so much, but they remain eternally losing players." So the idea here is that roadblocks are like more significant than just like tilt, like what I call misfires in the book, which is like, I guess, malfunctions at the table. Roadblocks are like things in your life or your psyche or your mentality or personality that maybe just hold you back. And one of them that I think is really undercovered as well in the poker community and in the coaching community is the idea that when you start suddenly playing a lot more volume, it can be really, really tough. Like, I don't know if you found that when you started ramping up the volume that suddenly more cracks started appearing in your mental game.
Yeah, definitely that happened to me. I think, I don't know if it was a combination of the volume and also that, this was my only source of income now. So I guess things that wouldn't have bothered me when I had when I was full-time employed, so I knew I had a certain amount of income coming in, things that wouldn't really have bothered me were starting to bother me. And I think it got exponentially worse as time went on, I guess.
Yeah, I've got 3 points here about like this roadblock. Is actually number 4 out of 10, like in descending order, so I've deemed it like the 4th most common obstacle actually. And the three things that I've sort of separated this into here are your swings seem more intense due to playing more hands in a short space of time.
Yeah.
Firstly, so like, imagine when you were still doing your iOS development full time and you were
Yeah.
just playing a little bit of poker on the side. If you played,
Yeah.
let's say you're a tournament player, right? So let's say you played 20 tournaments and you bricked all of them. Those would be spread across, like, I don't know, maybe a week or something like that. Whereas when you're playing full
Yeah.
time, you could brick all of them in a day and suddenly
Yeah.
drop like
Definitely.
all of that money right there and then. So
Yeah.
how did you find that then? Like that sort of that condensing of volume and the swings being more noticeable.
That was one of the scariest things, I think. You know, prior to going full time, I would rarely check my graph. I would sometimes check it just to see kind of, I guess, verification that I was doing okay in the game. But when I started to play more volume, I found myself checking my graph sort of way more often than I should be, and way more often than it's actually healthy. So yeah, that was definitely a problem.
And like checking graphs as well, this is like one of these things that it's not just a symptom, it's also a trigger of mental game
Yeah.
problems in my opinion, because it's
Yeah.
there, it's a symptom of being anxious and concerned about how much you're losing, right? That's like why it happens. But in
Yeah.
turn, I think it teaches players like a really bad habit of like wanting to do that more and feeling that compulsion more in future. So for me, this is like a really circular leak. And it's one that I cover extensively in the book. So what did you do then when you realised that that was such a problem?
Well, actually, this is when I decided to take up a staking deal around about the point where I was having sort of, I guess, I would say it was probably a small downswing, but at the time it felt a lot bigger.
Yeah.
So I was looking into kind of support, I guess. So how can I make sure that I'm doing the right thing in poker? Like, you know, I already was a member of training sites, but I wanted more, I guess, more support and a closer relationship with someone that I could talk to, and you know, just I guess support was the main thing. So I looked at a couple of staking options, and eventually took a deal with a professional player. And yeah, just kind of went from there, really.
Yeah, this is interesting because I have a lot of students that come to me from being staked.
Yeah.
And I don't want to say that all staking deals are bad. There are definitely some that are good, and there are some players that need to be staked because they just do not have they don't have the accountability. B, they might not be able to afford private coaching that they have to make an investment for, and C, they might need to play with money that's not theirs due to mental game issues and stuff like that. And what you said is definitely true. Like about that being your only focus. The other 2 points you wrote here under the inability to cope with high volume and the problems that generates are your willpower gets tested more than you're used to due to the pressures of poker being less diluted by other areas of life, and that's a big problem, and that's another reason why you need a mentor to build you back up and give you that motivation to keep going. And also poker feels more consuming and can have a larger impact on your mental health than normal. That's another thing that people sometimes feel when they do that. So I'm not surprised that you felt like when you made that transition that even after just a small to moderate downswing, you were more mental game wise more fragile than you would have been when poker was not the full focus. I think that's very, very standard. And there's ways that we can prepare for that before we do take the plunge. So when you got staked, then you started working with a staker. How did it go? Did it meet your expectations? Because I find a lot of students come to me from staking and say, yeah, it just wasn't for me, kind of thing.
I would say it had plus points and negative points as well. For I think one thing, I'll start with the plus points first, I guess. One thing that is noticeably, I guess, beneficial for me was the amount of work that I needed to put in. The backer was making sure that I was studying enough and was kind of, you know, checking up. I guess had that accountability where I didn't have that before. So I wasn't necessarily studying as much as I needed to be doing. I wasn't grinding as much as I needed to be doing. So that definitely did help. One thing that I found quite difficult though was because I was putting in more volume, as we said before, I had more, my mental game leaks were starting to come through a lot more. And I was trying to relate these leaks to the backer, and somehow they weren't able to kind of relate to me at all. And that was quite frustrating. So I would say, you know, I'm feeling this, or I'm feeling this, or I keep coming up against this. And they wouldn't really have any idea of how to deal with that. I don't know if it was because they didn't have these mental game issues themselves, or I'm not sure why.
Yeah, I think a lot of people sort of walk with a limp instead of getting their leg fixed, if that makes sense, when it comes to poker. Like, they do have the issues, but they just learn to survive with them somehow instead of fixing them.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. But that was quite frustrating at the time. But yeah, I mean, if I look back at my my kind of results over the last sort of year and a half, you can see where I was staked quite clearly, because the graph really steadily starts to increase. But that's not necessarily from the, you know, it's partly down to the coaching that I was getting, but not just from that. It's more I would say more the work ethic and the realization I had to put, you know, real study in, not just kind of look at some charts or whatever. And I had to try and analyze what I was doing, try and understand my decisions more than just try and memorize, you know, ranges, for example.
Yeah.
And I think that did come from being staked, to be honest. So that was a good thing.
Absolutely, and you're not paying for that as well. I mean, with private coaching, it's obviously great because you're getting all of that without having to give away any profit. And
exactly.
Ultimately, in the long term, that can be a better investment for some people if they're if they're in a position where they can do that. But that's the thing. Not everybody is, and just getting that sense of coordination and accountability and just that feeling of someone watching over you and monitoring you is definitely motivating for a lot of people. Cool. So at that point, when you got the staking, you started to put a lot more work in, and directly or indirectly, you experienced like a steady increase in results and things like that then. But let's go back to this mental game neglection a little bit, because I think it's maybe a wider problem than just like, it's not just this staker, obviously, right? It's like a lot of people
not at all.
that don't understand mental game, or maybe they don't separate the technical from the mental properly. And they think that if they work hard enough on their technical game, then all these mental game leaks will just go away. Or they somehow pretend that the mental game leaks are nothing more than not having the technical skill. You know, I get that a lot in coaching. I say, what mental game leaks do you have? And the student will say, oh, I've got a few, but I'm pretty sure that when my technical game becomes stronger, they'll just go away because I'll be more confident. And that's just not the case. Like, humans are not built for poker. We're not used to it. And that's like the whole premise of my book, Poker Therapy, that should be out in a couple of weeks. So let's talk a little bit about, if you don't mind, going into personally like the specifics of the mental game leaks that we were talking about earlier. I think you mentioned one where when you moved up in stakes, your game started to collapse a little bit because of how you felt about being at that new stake and what people were doing. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and how and sort of the reaction you got when you brought that up?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, as I moved up in stakes, I guess there was already a sort of curiosity about how the pool's going to play. You know, what are they going to be doing? Are they going to be these, like, you know, crazy sickos that are going to be making all these you know, insane bluffs, or, you know, just triple barreling these spots because they know, you know, I don't have this or whatever. So there was already this kind of preconception, I guess, about how the population was going to play. And so then when I came up against these spots, I was kind of fighting with myself, trying to think, are they doing this because of, you know, because they're just sickos and then just doing this, or are they doing this because of this? And I was just in a really weird place where I was just kind of questioning every decision I was making, or felt like, you know, I was just being completely outplayed in all these like random spots, and I was just trying to over adjust, and it was just not a nice feeling, to be honest. And the fact of the matter is, it was probably just, you know, just small amount of variance that I was just finding myself in these like really tricky spots. But it was just having quite a big impact on my game. And it's not an easy thing to be able to explain to someone, because most of the time they just say, "Oh no, just lay it down," or no, they're not doing this, or but it's if they don't understand where you're coming from, it's very difficult to ever kind of fix that leak, I guess.
Right. Because you're not coming from a place where you're saying, "Oh, I do this thing, and I wish I wasn't doing this thing," and then
No,
they can just go, "Oh, well, stop doing that thing then." It's
yeah,
like, "Doctor, doctor,
exactly,
it
yeah,
hurts when I do this." Well, don't do that. It's not quite that simple. Like the reason you're doing that is because you're in a whole different mode. Like your brain
yeah,
is in a mode where it's thinking in a certain way, and the subconscious is generating those thought processes,
yeah,
and you can't control that because it's reacting in a sort of innate, deeper way than just, oh, I'm going to cognitively and consciously decide what I want to think. If only we could do that, right, in all areas of life,
yeah,
but we can't. Um,
exactly. Like I think too. So I basically had to work on a lot of that stuff myself, just by various books that are already out and various kind of courses that I've looked at. And I know your book's coming out soon, so I'm interested to check that out. But I wouldn't say my mental issues are completely fixed at all. I think I'd be stupid to say that. I think anyone would be stupid to say that. But um, when I started to try and address them properly and try and kind of get to the root of the causes and actually work on it away from the tables, my results just they had a massive impact on my game.
yeah.
Huge. I would say more than anything else that I've ever worked on, mental game has been by far the most beneficial for me.
And I think that's a really, really common verdict that I get from students all the time.
Yeah.
So let's break this down in the language of poker therapy then, because in this book, everything that goes wrong at the table, that malfunctions, as it were, where we're in the wrong mode or thinking the wrong things from where we'd like to be, I deem a misfire. And misfire is basically the term I use in this book to describe probably like a process that we've learned as humans that's served us well in life. Chapter 2 of Poker Therapy is entitled The Alien World Problem. And in that chapter, I relate poker to an alien world where, and I talked about this in a previous podcast, where basically the rules are different, the laws of physics, as it were, mentally speaking, are different. So thought processes that have served us and our ancestors very well, evolving and growing up on Earth, don't really work so well in poker. And certainly one of these is this idea of skill levels being, really like exaggerated, like the differences in skill levels and things like that. Because in life, when we move up into like a new field and we see people around us who are like strong at what we do or ahead of us on the ladder in one way or another, we immediately measure things, right? We put things into this like measurement of like, people are better than me, therefore I am now like vulnerable or whatever. So the way I break this down in the language of poker therapy is that for every mental game problem, there is a trigger. And for you, that trigger was just playing against people that you perceived to be stronger than those you were used to playing against, right? And then facing aggression from them specifically.
Mm-hmm.
That was your trigger.
Yep.
Then there's an interpretation, and I use like a big red box here to show like a flawed interpretation, like the interpretation we'd want to change of that situation. And then after the interpretation, we have the response. And the very premise of poker therapy is that the trigger is not something we should try to avoid or change. Sometimes students try and avoid the situations that make them uncomfortable. They try to force different situations to avoid their triggers, but you can't. The triggers are naturally occurring poker situations. So in your case, facing the big bet from the perceived stronger player. Then the response is also something that we shouldn't seek to change, because we can't change the response when that response follows logically from the interpretation we have of the situation. So if you interpret this line as, let's say, I am vulnerable and under attack here, right? And that's your interpretation, emotionally and cognitively, of what's going on. It will be right for you as a human with your wiring to fight or flight in response to that. So it'd be right for you to start folding too much, start avoiding spots. That would be the flight, or more related to what your personal experience, I think, was fight, right? Like you were choosing to call down and not be run over and try and stand up for yourself, as it were. But that's a normal response. That's healthy because you've interpreted the spot psychologically as I'm under attack. So the thing that needs changed here is not the trigger, not the response, but the middle link. The interpretation is the middleman here. And that I am frail and under attack, or whatever you want to call it, that's what you need to change. And before, if you can't believe that you're not under attack and that you're not vulnerable, it will be very difficult to change that fight response. So that's, you probably found this out yourself, but it's that part of it that you have to change, not the button that you press at the end of the day or the situation that caused it.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And that's definitely one of the things that have improved in my game. You know, if I, you know, I just came off the back of another pretty decent W group actually this year, and I played way higher than I ever have done. And I think if I hadn't have worked on these particular issues, I would have just been absolutely, you know, I would have been in a world of pain. But I think, you know, being able to, like you said, not interpret the situation as I'm under attack is one of the biggest things that I had to learn. And you know, it's not. I'm still working on that part of things, in that side of things anyway. But that was, I guess, that was the main thing that I had to try to understand. You know, this guy, you know, might be a better player than me, but he's not specifically attacking me. You know, and once you kind of understand that, things, you can focus a bit more on hand. You can start to break things down a little bit better. You don't make impulse decisions based on emotion, I think. Yeah, and that was a really important thing that I had to work on.
Absolutely. I had a student who, I still have a student that had a very similar misfire to the one that you have here, and I changed his name in the book here, obviously, but I've got a section on case studies that are basically true stories from coaching, just with different names and aliases. And basically the rewire that we tried to use there, like this student had a lot of confidence issues in real life. Like he'd always felt like, you know, like maybe he was like bullied a bit in school and had a really strict like parent that was like quite domineering and punitive and stuff like that. And all of these things like can have, and they can affect which directions your misfires will adopt when you become a poker player. Like they can really affect which types of mental game leak that you end up having. So we took his constant idea of like, I am frail, I am weak, I am being attacked, I'm being bullied, and we tried to change it into the same mode that he would be in while he was at work. And while he was at work, he was very successful in what he did. He made a good amount of money. He descended quite far up the career path for his profession. And instead of thinking I'm frail and under attack and seeing himself as that vulnerable child in the playground and being in that mode, we kind of changed it into the mode of I am a successful professional with a problem to solve. And that interpretation of facing a bet from an aggressive player was the one that helped him break through by already seeing his self-image as someone who is competent and secure. And then when you feel secure and confident, because this is a survival misfire, right, that it triggers the automated human survival instincts of fight, flight, and freeze, you need to kind of disarm that idea that survival mechanisms are necessary before you can actually get into a rational mode. So we found by switching out his I'm frail and under attack interpretation to I'm successful and have a problem to solve, he was just immediately in that kind of frame of mind where he could think. And I don't know if you describe it the same way, but that student described that when we made that mental game progress as some sort of mist just clearing all of a sudden, like, and it was just suddenly being a clear.
Completely. I completely agree with that. I think what you said about having a problem to solve is definitely something I used as well. So if I was facing this bet or facing this particular spot, instead of feeling, you know, emotionally attacked, I would just think logically, like, right, I have a problem to solve and it's a pretty big problem. Like, how can I best go about solving it? And what I did after that was, for example, if it was a big final table or whatever where the replays would be up, I would go back and I would learn from these players and say, okay, they're betting like this because of this, or, you know, I wouldn't necessarily take it. I wouldn't feel under attack. I would try and learn from what they were doing, because a lot of the times what they were doing was correct.
Right.
So I think that's really interesting what you said.
And it's that humbleness as well, isn't it? Like another bad interpretation people have sometimes is that they feel like if I'm not better than him, then I'm failing. That's a very bad interpretation. You need to rewire that into something like, it doesn't matter where I am relative to others. All that matters is where I am relative to myself, and, you know, where I was yesterday, kind of thing.
Exactly.
Right? So
exactly. Like sometimes it's okay if you get outplayed. Like you can that's part of the game. You just have to learn from that, and especially if you can go back and rewatch the hands or like look at the spots again, you can really that can take your game to another level. If you're able to say, this guy outplayed me and he did this, this, and this, that's fine, and then you can use that in your own game.
Absolutely, yeah. And like being able to just say, okay, this player understands something that I didn't understand previously, and now I'm closer to that player's level, at least in this. And the other thing is, like, just because he is more aggressive than you and understands like how to triple barrel bluff more with blockers or something like that, it doesn't mean that he's an all-round better player. That guy might be full of spew and might fall apart every time he goes in a downswing. A lot of these really aggressive players are glass cannons, you know, like it's fine when they're running good, but when they're running bad, they melt completely down. So you just don't, you don't know how good somebody is. You don't know who they are, so it doesn't make sense to see them as this menacing predator. As soon as you interpret your opponent as a menacing predator, you can't help but feel frail and under attack. That's just natural.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree with that. I think the more you can kind of remove that, not necessarily remove that, but kind of talking about the emotional feeling that you have about being under attack, the more you kind of think more logically about the spot itself and what this player is doing. Maybe it might be wrong, but it might be right. But the more you can think about the logical part of what he's doing rather than the emotional attack, the better you can become.
That's right. It almost doesn't matter from a mental game perspective if you solve the spot correctly technically or not. Just the mere act of trying to solve the spot from a technical angle is a success when it comes to the mental game of poker. Like, that's a success. So so awesome. I also had a final point there that I was going to talk about, just on the lack of confidence, which is that people feel like they need to know what to do all the time. Sometimes, like, they feel like, I don't know what to do, therefore I'm not good enough and it's terrible. I mean, I still don't know what to do in a lot of spots. This is just a quick extract from Poker Therapy, and it's like a mock conversation that I've had with a student, and it falls under the heading roadblocks, which are like the more permanent problems, not just tilt at the table, but, you know, some kind of like overriding problem. And this one is about lack of confidence, and I'm basically saying to the student, well, what would help you feel more confident at the poker table? And the student is saying, I would know how to think about situations and wouldn't feel confused. And that statement, I would know how to think about situations and wouldn't feel confused, is so problematic, and it is such a bogus and wrong interpretation of what it is to get better at poker, that, and it's so unrealistic, that goal, that is going to hold that student back. As long as his interpretation of learning poker is, I need to know how to think, he's going to fail, because he's never going to meet that bar. It's set too high. He's never going to jump that high. And so, like, to rewire that, we obviously have to set a more realistic goal and work on the interpretation of confusion. Is confusion inadequacy, or is confusion just normal and fascinating? Because the latter is the interpretation you have to have. All right,
completely agree with that.
Let's talk a little bit then about what happened post-staking then. So presumably you decided that this wasn't really working out for you from a financial point of view, the staking, and when?
Yeah, I think it was it was a mutual kind of termination, I guess, of the contract. I don't think it was working for either side. You know, I made a small amount of money, they made a small amount of money, but it wasn't, you know, wasn't anything to write home about. So after that, I at this time, so I was full time at that point. I went, so it was around Christmas, and I decided in the new year I would go back to kind of the routine that I was doing before. So I'm self-employed, which kind of is good because it gives me the freedom to work on my game outside of you know, when I don't have contracts on, etc. So I decided to go back and do that in the new year, and I've been doing that ever since. So I'll work sort of normal sort of hours, but I get to work from home a lot, doing what I do, which is great because I can just kind of, I could study and get some volume in as well. And so I've been doing that since Christmas, I think, last year. And I'll probably, to be honest, I'll probably continue doing that for a while because it's working well. I think a lot of people think, you know, you can't have success at poker unless you're playing full time, which I don't necessarily agree with. I do agree that the more time you spend, obviously, the better you're going to get. But I don't agree that it has to be all or nothing. I definitely don't agree with that.
Yeah, I agree with that, what you're saying. I think, like, for me personally, and I've said this on the podcast before, full-time grinding does not suit my personality or my mentality at all. In fact, my game is liable to deteriorate if I spend too much time studying and grinding and not enough time speaking to other people or working on a creative project or something. That's why I write, that's why I coach, because I'm in a similar situation to you where I can totally relate to that, you know, like having something else to sort of, like, you're a developer, right? So you're actually producing things, right? You're producing, when you're studying poker, it's all isolated intake. When you're grinding, it's all just output, but not particularly, people can say you can be expressive through your play or whatever, but I don't think it's a very creative thing. I think that when you're playing poker, you're trying to access what you've been studying, and it's almost like sitting an exam. It's like that kind of thing. You're trying to produce the right thing at the right time, like you would in a big exam or something like that when you're playing. So I don't think any of that is particularly nurturing to human needs, such as socializing, expressing yourself, creating, producing, feeling like you've, I don't know, made something worthwhile. I think the whole playing 60 hours a week is a recipe for mental game collapse unless you're very, very used to that. Again, going back to the whole when you suddenly increase volume, things go wrong kind of thing. So I think that's great. I think having that kind of balance, and I would recommend to people that, you know, semi-professional poker is a very good way to go, provided that you have the thing on the side that also supports you and makes you happy. You've got your development. I've got like coaching and writing. A lot of poker players these days move into those areas for that reason. But it doesn't need to be in poker. It could be something else as well. You could just be a part-time freelance, whatever, writer, journalist, artist. It doesn't really matter. But I would recommend having a creative outlet as well for most people. Or if not creative artistically, then creative in the sense that you're producing things, you know, other than just PIO simulations.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. Having a healthy balance is so important, I think.
Yeah, and getting out and seeing people and just like interacting as well instead of just
I mean, I made a pretty big mistake this W Coupe actually. I grinded the whole series but didn't take any time off work, and even just 3 weeks of doing that, I'm still recovering now. Just because I didn't balance my time properly. I tried to grind every evening and then go to work every day, and it was just an absolute nightmare.
Yeah, talk about not being frail and under attack. Now you're frail and under attack from your own time management and volume management. So you can easily do yourself in as a poker player, and the temptation, because we're a little obsessive by nature, the temptation for us poker players is just to be like, right, if I play 78 hours this week, I can hit these goals and these goals, and it's just not healthy. It's self-destructive.
No,
a lot of us have that.
Yeah, I think often I'll if I balance my time properly and I set dedicated, you know, study time, dedicated play time, dedicated other time, my results are just so much better. I just feel better in general. Even if I have a losing session, I just feel so much better.
Yeah, and you have perspective, don't you? It's like when you're in the midst of variance, you have like that, I don't know, as a cash game player, probably like a 10 or 15 buy and downswing. These are like relatively common. And when you have one of those, when you're just cramming volume, it happens in like a couple of days, and you just, again, it's that condensing aspect, and you just feel like, oh, is there any escape from this? Like that's how I used to feel, actually. That captures the interpretation I used to have. Is there any escape from this horrible reality of this downswing? And when you coach and you write or you build software or you do whatever, there is an escape, and it also makes you money, it makes you feel good about yourself, and that balance is so key. I don't think I would still be in poker today if I had to just play full time, because I'd have got really sick of it and probably just decided it wasn't making me happy. So I'm very much on the side of let's big up the semi-pro lifestyle if it's feasible. For some people, they don't have another thing that they can do, and they have to play full time, and that's fair enough. But then look after yourself if you're doing that, I guess, would be my advice. Very quickly then, let's finish up by talking about why, in a nutshell, you think you've surpassed the progress made by most sort of amateurs or semi-pro players. Like most people who try to make it at poker, like I read out to you at the start of this interview, they don't really get anywhere, and that's really common. So what have you done right that they have perhaps not done right?
It's a good question. I mean, I don't, in terms of what they've not done right, I obviously I wouldn't be able to say that, but what I can tell you is,
maybe as a coach, but what have you done right?
what I can tell you that has worked for me, without a shadow of a doubt, is um, working on. I think working on my mental game was the biggest thing that had an impact on my results. Um, you know, before I even knew about mental game, my I didn't know why, but I would always, I'd come off a session feeling bad. My results would just be very, very poor. I'd go on these like ridiculous downswings, which weren't necessarily due to variance. It was due to mental game leaks. And when I started working on that, it just had a huge impact on my game, had an impact on my life, kind of outside of poker as well. So I would say that's one of the main things that has led me to have some success in poker was just working on that. I guess the other thing would be I take my I schedule my time quite well now. So I know that if I want to play poker, I'm doing it to try and make money. If I want to make money, I have to study. So I schedule specific time to study, which I don't know if people do. I feel like a lot of people, especially when they play part-time, they just study when, I don't know, they're running bad or they're on a downswing or whatever. But that's just a recipe for disaster, if you ask me. Like, you need that.
They never study,
But,
and they don't even know
or
that
that,
they're
yeah,
not studying. They just sort of say, "Oh, I'll study this next time I study," but they haven't studied in 3
yeah,
weeks, and they don't know.
no,
Yeah,
exactly, yeah. So that's yeah. I would say those are the two main things.
awesome. All right, Jules, it's been really interesting talking to you. I think you're a really interesting and inspiring case for a lot of people listening to this podcast, and I'd love to catch up with you, I don't know, a year from now and just see how things are going and touch base. Have you back on?
Yeah, sounds good, man. Awesome. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, you're welcome. All the best of luck. And for the rest of you guys, if you're interested in when Poker Therapy is going to be released, I know I've prattled on about it a lot in this episode. It's going to be probably the end of October / start of November. I will do an official launch podcast with extracts and stuff like that, just to promote a little bit more and let you guys know what the book will be about. But it'll be available on the store, which you can reach via carrotcorner.com. The book will have its own page there for you to get a free sample and just to look into it in a bit more detail. I would strongly recommend that you take Jules' advice today and work on your mental game, and I hope Poker Therapy will be the gateway to you taking your mental game more seriously. Until next time, guys, this has been Pete Carrotus Clark. This has been episode 82 of the Carrot Poker Podcast. Good luck at the tables, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye for now.